As far as I know, there is no other theory of everything that has a direct, concrete, mathematical, rigorous connection between mainstream physics and implications for how we organize ourselves as a society.
I took a look at a lot of the content that you had sent me, and I was very impressed. I really think that you were onto a lot of truth in your theory, and I just kind of wanted to get a bit about your background, your educational background, and how what is your personal drive, I guess, in this project that you have with pursuing a theory. I guess you already have, published your theory of everything, but how did you get involved in this space?
Well, first of all, sure. First of all, thanks a lot for having me on. It's a privilege, and I look forward to talking about your impressions of the material. In terms of my background, my educational background, I grew up in Southern California. I was raised as a Catholic and had the good fortune of going to Catholic schools for most of grammar school and high school, and then got recruited to study at Harvard. At Harvard, I met a professor who was very formative in terms of having an impact on the way I thought and viewed the world and reality. And it was a problem that he dedicated his life to studying, and the predicament of not having a resolution to that problem that ended up, or that started me on the path that led me eventually toward physics. And in physics, of course, the biggest open question is how to reconcile quantum mechanics with general relativity. And so that's how I arrived to that point, trying to resolve this professor's dilemma, which was a human dilemma. He's a professor of psychology. And what he dedicated his life to is the intellectual differences between people. Not only intellectual differences, but that was what he was most known for. And this idea that that we are raised believing that people are equal meets up with this incredibly important roadblock in terms of physics and biology, that we are not, in fact, equal, that people are very different. And so this collision between the physical and biological reality of human physical nature and our philosophical aspirations for creating a better world is precisely what has motivated all of my work and all of my investigation, my research, my books, etc. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
It does. I think you and I are pretty aligned in that. I think that it's profound that your focus on physics is almost for the sake of improving human interactions and human structures. I think that that's very important. And I've heard a lot of people say that a theory of everything, I think it was Garrett Lisi and Eric Weinstein said this, that a theory of everything is not a theory of everything, really. It is physics alone, and basically, and that it doesn't transcend fields so much, but I tend to think that that's not true, and it does transcend fields, and that the same patterns that we see in physics are the same patterns that we could use to help improve, social systems and things like that. So I was taking a look at a lot of your content, and I did see that you said that physics was the fundamental science. And if what I've noticed is a lot of people who are really making headway in this theory of everything space are people who are like computer scientists, people involved in psychology, people involved in philosophy a lot lately. Do you think that that means that potentially it's physics that's holding us back from actually making progress in a theory of everything, in a way that they're so detached from, I guess you could say, putting it in the context of consciousness or sentient beings?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if physics is holding us back. I think when I say that physics is the most fundamental science, I'm saying it as an objective observation in the sense that there is nothing else without physics. For example, you can't think a thought about consciousness without physics. In other words, and there's no evidence for that as far as I know. There's some indirect evidence for it through near-death experiences and these types of things. But we always have the fact that it's communicated through humans.
Yeah.
It's always coming back into the body. So there's always a physical foundation to everything. And I think what is holding us back is this inability to understand or reconcile the world of the subatomic world with the macroscopic world.
Mm-hmm.
This inability to reconcile that is, I think, ultimately what makes us unable to make progress in the other branches of science.
Mm-hmm.
In everything from psychology to political science to philosophy. I think everything is hinged on this definitive reconciliation that comes from physics. That's what I'm referring to when I say physics is foundational.
Okay.
The same can't be said, as far as I know. I've never heard a compelling argument to say that, for example, all of the people who are studying consciousness, if their theories turn out to be correct, if consciousness as they understand it is fundamental, what are the implications for physics? They're not clear about that at all. In fact, they don't even venture to say what are those implications for
Mm-hmm.
physics, meaning the biggest concrete problems in physics.
Yep.
Or what are the implications for political philosophy?
Yep.
Once again, there's a dead end there. They don't say anything about it. In contrast, in my own work, I propose a way to reconcile quantum mechanics with general relativity using standard, mainstream, well-developed ideas from physics, from theoretical physics,
Mm-hmm.
that then have direct implications for every other question. Perhaps with the exception of consciousness, because when it comes to consciousness, I hold that although there's nothing directly implied by my work about consciousness, I part from the basic idea that it's better to be conscious than to be not conscious.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's better to be alive than to be dead.
Yeah.
If a person is willing to accept this, if a person is willing to accept that it's better for human species to be alive than to be extinct, then all of my work and all of the contributions that I'd like to make through these ideas and these books is really important because it has direct implications precisely about that question. How do we stay alive as a species?
Yeah.
I don't say what consciousness is because I contend that it doesn't really matter what it is. If we die, if we go extinct, we'll never have a chance to know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If we remain alive, then there is a chance that one day we will understand in a rigorous scientific way exactly
Yep.
what consciousness is.
Yeah.
So that's my contention about consciousness.
I saw that you said that a theory of everything is more valuable if it provides, value towards advancing humanity and making sure, we don't go extinct. And and you said that that should be used as kind of a way of judging it. And I do agree with you on that. I think that's very true, in that you have to, there are so many theories out there that you have to kind of navigate and prioritize certain things. And if you're going to prioritize anything, it should be, you know, does it better humanity in general? I saw there was a guy that he's a physicist that you had referenced, and when it was a number of them, it was like after they have claimed to come up with the theory of everything, they were like, well, the results are, you know, doesn't really change anything. You know, there's nothing really to move forward with from there.
Sure.
Yeah, that does. I think that's probably not correct, but I wanted to talk to you more about, like, you said that the universe appears to be mirroring the human mind, essentially, or the animal mind, which is, you know, the same basic structure. Or I guess brain is, I think, the word you used more than mind, but
Sure.
wanted to hear
I
your
think one
opinions
way,
on
I think one perhaps more, I'm not sure what word to describe it, more acceptable way, or more correct way to describe it, is that the information processing associated with an animal brain appears to be symmetrical. And here the key word is symmetrical, because symmetry has played a fundamental role in the development of science, and especially in the development of physics. And it continues to play a fundamentally important role. In keeping with that line and that tradition of symmetry, it appears that two very interesting lines of research, and very rigorous and mainstream lines of research, seem to indicate that there is a symmetry between the way information is processed in the cosmos or in nature, and the way information is processed in the human physical brain.
Okay.
In other words, that the human, or not only human, but animal brain.
Yep.
The animal brain has a in very simplistic terms, the human brain has a two-dimensional boundary, right? That boundary separates the interior of that brain from the exterior environment. Information from that exterior environment comes into that two-dimensional shell of the brain through our senses. And then that information is transformed in ways that we don't completely understand to everything we experience as conscious beings. Our thoughts, our emotions, our plans, our goals, all of these things are emergent, or appear to be emergent phenomena that are a result of information that hits the outer boundary of our minds and creates these impressions. So the universe appears, once again, appears to work in this same way. And we get this from two specific developments. One is the two-state vector formalism of Yakir Aharonov, an Israeli physicist. And the other is string theory, which has come about also to a disproportionate extent from Jewish physicists. So it's very interesting, this Jewish connection. We can talk about it later, but people like Leonard Susskind and many other Jewish physicists have helped to bring about these developments in string theory, which indicate that the cosmos itself is configured as a hologram. There's this thing known in theoretical physics as the ADS-CFT correspondence, which posits that the universe, in some sense, is like a balloon, if you will. The outer shell of that balloon is like a mirror, or there's a correspondence between everything on that outer shell and everything inside.
Yep.
So this, in a very, very crude and simplistic way, appears to be how the information is processed by animals as well, and animal brains. So that's a very simplistic kind of summary of why I say there appears to be a symmetry between the way information is processed in nature and the way information is processed in an animal brain. The most significant part of this, I think, is the fact that, well, there's several important parts to remember, to keep in mind here. Number one, this is not fringe physics that's way out there on the limb somewhere. This is absolutely mainstream theoretical physics that has resulted from 500 years of very well-tested ideas and progress in science. So this is not fringe in any sense whatsoever. That's first of all. Second of all, the ideas themselves lead to very important implications for how we understand ourselves, first of all, and how we can organize ourselves as a species. That is what really differentiates the proposed theory of everything here and any other proposed theory of everything. Because as you indicated earlier correctly, there is, as far as I know, there is no other theory of everything that has a direct, concrete, mathematical, rigorous connection between mainstream physics and implications for how we organize ourselves as a society, or how to resolve the tension between, for example, individualism and collectivism.
Yep.
Or how we resolve the difference between the fact that people have different levels of talent and different levels of ability. How do we create a society based on equality if everybody's unequal? These very big questions that plague the planet at the moment, and that if we don't resolve them, they're bound to cause unprecedented harm to unimaginable numbers of people.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of the things that interested me most about your work, because I professionally come from the political environment, and so I got into physics by I realized that this was a huge problem. This struggle between individualism and collectivism, and just the way in which society processes events, and it led to me getting involved in kind of artificial intelligence, and then I got into physics because I started to see that there was an important coherence between these various things, and so I definitely agree with you on that. I think physics has a lot to offer us insofar as how we can better organize society, and so. But getting back to a bit about when you said that the universe or the cosmos appears to mirror a brain, and that there is an interior processing and an exterior processing. I saw in one of your videos you were talking about vantage points, and you said that if you went to the very outermost edge of the cosmos and peered inward versus and then you could also go from the very center of the cosmos and peer outward. Do you think that this dualistic, this dualism of perspective is basically how very key to uniting quantum mechanics and general relativity? These two vantage points correspond some way to that?
I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it because the reconciliation of quantum mechanics and general relativity comes through the idea that space and time emerge from something more fundamental on the one hand, and string theory, which is a combination of this idea we're talking about, which is holography.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really two vantage, I suppose it is two vantage points or two frames of reference. It comes from string theory and it comes from the ADS CFT correspondence, but that in itself doesn't really reconcile quantum mechanics and general relativity. I think what reconciles it conceptually is understanding that the way we experience reality as people corresponds to the way nature works. In other words, I'm saying I'm having trouble explaining what I mean here. Back to your question about whether or not the ADS CFT correspondence and the two frameworks of being on the outer shell of the universe versus seeing things from the inside the universe, whether that itself resolves quantum mechanics and general relativity.
Not so much resolves. I mean more like, is that a very necessary idea in the resolution? And I would imagine there's also more to it, but I guess.
It's central. It's certainly central. It's
Okay.
certainly central. It's a central aspect of it because, again, it's the information processing associated with that ADS CFT correspondence and the information processing associated with how animal brains work. And so this symmetry, right? This symmetry is what resolves or what reconciles quantum mechanics with general relativity. Let's take a couple of steps back here and remember that the central tension or the central difficulty between reconciling the microscopic world with the macroscopic world comes from among other things, the measurement problem. So if you drill down into anything material, you get to the subatomic level, and things don't behave apparently they don't behave in ways that they behave in this macroscopic world that we live in.
Yep.
In other words, things appear to be in two places at the same time. You go into a realm or a domain of probabilities. And how we get from this world that we live in, where we don't live in a world of probabilities, you and I are only in one place at the same time, not in more than one place at the same time.
Yep.
So this inability to reconcile these two domains is where string theory has emerged, or it's one of the fundamental problems in physics to this day. And string theory resolves that.
Mm-hmm.
Many scientists have been, from Einstein on, have tried to reconcile these two domains. And string theory, as of today, remains the most promising approach in terms of the number of adherents, in terms of the number of resources that have been committed to it, in terms of impact on other areas of math. String theory is the most promising. There are many critics, of course,
Yep.
because string theory has problems. It's not testable. But one of the main problems with string theory is the idea that there's 10 dimensions.
Yep.
Okay. But mathematically, it's a very interesting, or it's the most interesting model or proposal to how to reconcile the small world with the big world, or the microscopic world with the macroscopic world. Okay, so this string theory has a number of problems. Chief among them, apart from the fact that it's not testable, or as of yet it's not testable, is the idea that there are 10 dimensions, yet we don't have access to those extra dimensions. We have access only to 4 dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
Where are those extra 10 dimensions? So it's in this context that the idea that there is a correspondence between the way information is processed in an animal brain and the way information is processed in the universe, that I contend resolves conceptually the problem with string theory.
Okay.
And that's where the idea of the correspondence that you mentioned earlier between viewing things from inside of a globe, if you will, versus you viewing things from the outside. It's not necessarily the two frames that resolve conceptually the difficulty. It's understanding. In fact, let me for the sake of visualization, I think a balloon helps. So here we have a balloon, for example. So back to your question, if I understood it correctly, was if we understand this as the universe and the outer boundary of that, the two-dimensional outer boundary of the universe is mirrored by everything inside the three-dimensional balloon,
Mm-hmm.
whether that resolves quantum mechanics and general relativity. And so the long and the short of my response is that correspondence in itself doesn't resolve the tension. I think what resolves the tension is understanding that there's a symmetry between, if this is the universe and this is my brain, the way my brain functions is similar to the way the cosmos functions.
Mm-hmm.
And that in addition to all of the other arguments for string theory, which are primarily the rigor of the mathematics behind it, those two in combination make it a compelling argument, in addition to the implications for every other branch of human study. Hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. The critics of string theory argue that, it's basically stalled out, and that it hasn't really told us anything new for quite some time. What do you think the reasons for that are? And do you agree with why do you think that it does appear that physics, until recently, I would say, has seemed to stall out in the mainstream, at least? I mean, it does seem like, I took a look at your work. I think it's very compelling. I think that Stephen Wolfram is doing a lot of, compelling work, and Eric Weinstein is doing a lot of work that I think is compelling too. But these are kind of recent, not so much recent developments, but recent in that they're surfacing into the common conversation, I guess. What do you think has held physics back a little bit, if you think that that is true?
No, that is true. I think all of the criticisms, or most of the criticisms against string theory, are well-founded. The primary of these being that it's no longer physics, it's a mathematical argument.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can't test something, if it's purely mathematical, then you get into the realm of philosophy.
Yep.
And philosophy has this perennial problem of not being resolvable or not being definitive.
Do you think that sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Do you think that philosophy, a lot of people would say that about like sociology and the political sciences as well, but if you think that physics can help resolve and bring, I guess, direction and resolution to, or objectivity to, political science and sociology, do you think that that's also possibly true with philosophy, or that that's kind of a different structure?
No, absolutely. What is being proposed is a theory of everything in the literal sense. Mm-hmm. It has direct implications for every other branch of human study without exception. Perhaps one might argue that there's not much to say about consciousness, and other than it's better to be alive than to be dead. It doesn't pretend to resolve the problem of consciousness, mm-hmm. because it parts from the idea that it's better for us to continue to live as a species than it is for us to go extinct. So it doesn't say anything about consciousness. But in terms of philosophy, it certainly resolves the biggest open questions in philosophy, or it provides a path to resolve those. And the path is a physical path. I'll give you an example of what I mean about this. You might have two people who differ on a philosophical question. And one person might say, I think it's better for every person to slit their wrists and the other person says, no, 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 I disagree. I don't think it's a good idea for every person to slit their wrist. Physics itself will determine which of those ideas continues to exist. In other words, bad ideas don't stand the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
So physics and time ultimately determine what is good and right and true by giving that which is good and right and true existence,
Mm-hmm.
and that which is not as good or as right or as true, less existence.
Yeah.
And this is not philosophy. This is actually something, an argument that I built from the ground up, from string theory, and more concretely, from the principle of least action, which is one of the most fundamental principles in physics.
Okay.
So this is the sense that there's a direct implication for everything in every other branch of human study.
I saw you spoke to Lawrence Krauss, and I think it was him that you were saying he defined himself as an anti-theist, which or it might have been someone else, but I thought it was Lawrence Krauss. I appreciate that he said that, because I think that there's theists and anti-theists in a way. It's not really, I don't really know how much I agree with the term atheist, but and that's coming from somebody who I would have identified as an atheist for the majority of my life, until about physics and God for me were very simultaneous developments in my life.
Interesting.
What you said, that it seemed like physics and religion, which, you know, people have all kinds of meanings attached to that phrase specifically, but I guess you could say the idea of the existence of theism or of God is kind of appears to be reconciling a bit. This is something I agree with, and from what I've seen in physics. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? Just your thoughts on where does God, what would you define God as? If you would define God, what are your personal beliefs with this? And how do you think that this relates to physics at all?
Sure, that's another area where I think the proposed framework provides definitive answers to some of the biggest open questions in religion as well. And I think there's obviously a direct connection between between physics, or the nature of reality, and theist or atheistic questions. And curiously enough, I think you can take the framework that I've put together and argue just as strongly for atheism or for theism. That's my contention.
Okay.
Unfortunately, for atheists, you have to first come up with the framework to argue it.
Mm-hmm.
Atheists at this point have nothing meaningful to contribute to the biggest questions about human existence. The only thing they have to say is, you can't prove that God exists. And here I make an analogy. I compare the human predicament, the modern human predicament, on a planet that is chock full of nuclear weapons, with the following scenario. Imagine two groups, two families, or two people on the edge of a lake, and their children are swimming in the lake and everything's fine. The next minute, their children are drowning, right? So obviously, if the children are drowning, one needs to act in order to stop them from drowning, to save them. So an atheist in this scenario, again, against the modern human scenario, is like one of those parents saying, you can't prove that God exists. It just seems like such a vapid and empty and useless response to the human predicament.
Mm-hmm.
You can't prove that God exists. What do you mean you can't prove that God exists? Will you shut up and let's go save the children?
Yeah.
I think there's an analogy here in terms of what are you going to say about the human predicament? What are you going to say about the fact that we can't reconcile individualism with collectivism, with the fact that we have a planet chock full of nuclear weapons and we have leaders who don't know what they're doing, who could, from one day to the next, literally blow up the planet?
Yeah.
To mention only one of the threats, there's several other important threats. One of them is the fact that we're about to start genetically engineering ourselves.
Yes.
And we have no idea what we're doing. We have no idea how to make these decisions. And the atheist response to this is, in my view, just absolutely juvenile, and you might even say it's asinine. How can you respond to the human predicament by saying you can't prove God exists?
Yeah.
On the other hand, I will say that the atheist challenge to theists is just as compelling and just as important. Because what does it mean to say that God will save the world, or that Christ will save the world? What does it mean to say that, or who cares about an afterlife? If we kill ourselves on this planet, who cares what happens in the next life, right? I want my children to live, and I want to live in this life. I understand that from a human perspective. And I think there's a lot of validity to the idea that, okay, what matters is this world. What happens in the next world, if there is a next world, that will take care of itself when that time comes. For now, what are we going to do about this world? I think there's a lot of validity to that take.
Yeah.
The difference being that the theist has something meaningful to say about that, because for the theist, the goal, at least from my perspective, the goal is salvation. And whatever salvation means, at the very least, it means non-human extinction.
Yeah.
So what can we say about non-human extinction? And I think that's where maybe the most compelling part of the proposal that I'm making can be found.
So yeah, I think that's a great way to move on to that kind of a topic. Is one of the things that this is the problem that got me into physics. Was one day I was just thinking about technology, and I know Eric Weinstein calls it the twin nuclei problem, and but I wasn't aware who he was at the time, and I had just kind of had this revelation that, you know, I was always a techno-optimist, but then all of a sudden I got involved in politics and realized that collectivism and the struggle between individualism and collectivism combined with technology like genetic engineering and nuclear weapons and things like that, this is not looking like it's a good path or an easy thing to overcome. And I basically thought we were doomed. And so I started exploring like what could change the game, I guess. And that led me quite a bit of places. But I did hear you say, and this was a challenge too. I agree with it. Eric Weinstein's kind of proposal that, you know, bypassing light speed and spreading out is the solution to this. I don't really understand how that works, because when you go far away, it's twofold. One, you're going to take the problems with you because you're not changing anything.
Exactly.
But also, you just destroyed the buffer as well of space itself, because if you can go from one side of the universe to the next instantly, basically, then it's almost like the distance doesn't matter. So it's like, how does spreading out even help at all? It's almost like you're actually less spread out, even though you're more spread out in a way. So just because you can the distance is no longer, it's a non-factor at that point. So I'm very interested to hear what you think is I don't know if you believe it's inevitable or whether or not you believe that it's, you know, something we need to fight for, or both. But what your take is on a solution to this problem. I guess, of technology and politics not looking like it looks like it's going to lead to a human extinction, or at least very much so like human entropy, to the point of just, slowly dying.
Sure. Sure. First, a couple of remarks about Eric Weinstein. I think a lot of his ideas are very, very interesting. He's obviously a very gifted speaker, very talented. He's entertaining up to a certain point. But there's big problems with his proposal. First of all, as you pointed out, even if we could travel somewhere else and by breaking the speed of light barrier, you're taking the same problems with you, right? If you don't resolve them here, what makes us think that they're going to be resolvable on the other side of the universe? It seems like to be the same problems there. And second, it's still wishful thinking. It's like saying, why don't we just hold hands and love each other? Okay, that's fine. Why don't we break the speed of light? Okay, how?
Yeah.
How? That's the biggest question. So there's two big problems on his part. One is, okay, break the speed of light. Okay, I have an idea, but I don't want to write it in a paper. I'll finally write it in a paper, but nobody understands it, and I can't explain it. These are big problems for a theory of everything. In the context of the modern human predicament, right? And okay, let's break the speed of light. Okay, but how? How? But there's no answers forthcoming, right?
Yeah.
And his ideas are not taken seriously by the physics community.
Yeah.
So these are two big problems. So in contrast to that, in sharp contrast to that, are the set of ideas that I'm putting forth. They are absolutely mainstream. They're testable. They are a natural development or outgrowth of 500 years of physical and scientific development. And they have a very specific proposal that comes through social choice theory, which is another branch of economics. And there are basic fundamental problems, just as there are in physics, in social choice theory, which studies the phenomenon of collective decisions. How do we make choices as groups of people, right? So there's some real tension and problems in this field. So the proposal that I'm putting forth not only resolves conceptually some of the biggest open questions in physics, the math leads to a resolution of these open questions in social choice theory. So let me bring all of that down to earth and explain to you and answer your question in a very practical way. How do we resolve the problem between individualism and collectivism? Or how do we resolve the problems in democracy? How do we get the right kinds of people into leadership positions? And the answer is through an evolution of our concept of democracy. At the moment, everybody is considered equal politically. Everybody has one vote. So in society, and I'm going to use a very simplistic analogy, but I think it's very real. Society is based up of people, and people are always morally on a continuum between a Mother Teresa at one extreme and an Adolf Hitler at the other extreme.
Yep.
And I'm not passing judgment on which one of these is good or bad. Some people may believe that Adolf Hitler is the good one and Mother Teresa is the evil one, like Christopher Hitchens, maybe.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter which one you think is good or bad. Society is comprised of this continuum from your conception of good to your conception of bad. And everybody has one vote. This physically and mathematically does not make sense because this is not how nature works. So the idea is to use the mathematics that governs reality, governs nature, based on this symmetry that we've established between how information is processed in the human brain or in animal brains, and how information is processed in the cosmos. Use that same mathematics, apply it to social choice theory, give some people more votes in proportion to the inverse square law, so that societies are organized roughly analogously to how the solar system and how the universe itself is organized.
Okay.
In the solar system, for example, the sun, because of its mass, determines how the rest of the planets orbit around it because of its mass. So if we got social choice theory correctly, each society or each group of people or each nation would determine which group of people would play the role of the sun around which society revolves. Some people might decide, okay, we want all of the Adolf Hitlers to have more power. Other people will decide, okay, no, we want to be governed by people like Mother Teresa. Both are free to make their decisions on a local, regional, national level. Everybody's free to make their decisions. Physics and time will tell which one of those is good and right and true. So that's the idea.
Okay, I think I largely agree with that. So you're saying that we need to create structures that organize us, to create basically more of a hierarchy that is corresponding to the laws of nature, as opposed to this kind of chaotic one, every person gets a vote type of mentality that does seem to lead to just an inability to have sense making, I guess, is on a collectivist scale I've seen. So you're basically saying we need a hierarchy.
That's important to stress in that this is a bona fide and well-defined problem in social choice theory, for which Kenneth Arrow received a Nobel Prize in 1950 or so, because he defined mathematically, rigorously, the problems with this, with our conception of one person, one vote. That's impossible. It's called the impossibility theorem. That's impossible to come to a satisfactory resolution. So it's something that's not only that we experience in our everyday lives on a social and political level, but it's something that's very well defined in economics and social choice theory.
What would you think is the ideal, and I know you said that we need to have different groups have freedoms to try different paths, essentially, and I think that I agree with that, but what do you think personally should decide how the votes are allocated?
The most logical way to do this is through taxation and through voluntary taxation. That's my contention, that's my argument, that a person who contributes more should have more weight in the collective decision-making process. Now, one natural objection to this that always comes up is, no, that in this case, you're giving more power to the wealthy. No, that's not the case, because the voluntary taxes, the taxation, can be measured proportionally, so that a 5% contribution by a school teacher is the same politically as a 5% contribution by a billionaire, even though the billionaire gives much more in absolute terms.
Okay, that makes sense. So you're saying, though, that it should be voluntary how much taxes you pay, but that the percentage of taxes that you are contributing should correspond to the amount of votes that you get.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. So because I was going to say that it sounds like, this is, at first it sounded like, exactly what we have, kind of where Jeff Bezos, due to the free market, just and the way money works in politics and influence and everything, that he does have kind of more votes than any, than a normal person already, but it makes sense that if it's based on a percentage of giving taxes, then that does change the rules. So
it absolutely changes it. Yeah, it's absolutely the opposite of that, because that initial objection is absolutely justified. If you're giving more power to the wealthy, then this is just already what we have. You're just making it worse. But in reality, if you understand the proposal, it's the exact opposite. It's moving anybody who has any significant amount of wealth, moving them out of the political arena. There's nothing wrong with being wealthy. In fact, there's many, many very good things about entrepreneurship and freedom and creativity. The world needs to revolve around that, but there's no room in politics for this.
okay.
Politics is not about serving myself or my own interests. It's about the common good. So there's a space where entrepreneurship is great everywhere. But if you want to make €1 billion, fantastic, but you don't belong in politics.
Mm-hmm.
You don't belong, what you say and what you think is wonderful in terms of products and services. But when it comes to deciding what the rules of society are, or the rules of the planet are, your say should be almost nothing.
Mm-hmm. So
compared to those who invest the most in society.
Okay. So what is your solution, I guess, if there will end up being inevitably, I think, many people that basically give 100% of their income to taxes. It won't be the majority, obviously, but it will be, on a macro level, kind of a large number, I would imagine. How are leaders chosen in this framework, I guess, just by the group still? So there's still democratic elections.
It's still a democracy, sure.
Okay.
Still a democracy. It's still a democracy, and you elect through reason and evidence and logic and persuasiveness. I think, but it's very different to think of a group of very self-interested people trying to come to a decision about what should be done about the planet or about human well-being, versus a group of people who's not in it for themselves or for their families, but rather in it as kind of like a referee in a game. You want a referee who doesn't have any stake in the game. You want a referee who's going to call the shots like they should be called. That's what you want in politics.
Yeah, it's interesting. You and I have very different solutions to this in a way, but we both have like similar goals in this. Is I basically said that I thought only married people should vote, because it's like people who have a stake in society, and you're taking, I don't know, there's lots of reasons for it, but the same idea was, and I'm not saying it's correct, it was just, this was my conclusion, that it's like it's about, you want people who have committed themselves to caring for others around them, and whether that's a spouse, but then yours, it's more of on a societal level. But it's basically the same idea, it seems. It's just like you want people who have committed to the greater good, I guess, as inherently as like those people who are getting a vote. But so, I mean, that's fascinating. It sounds kind of like some blockchain, the ways in which some rules in some of the blockchain systems work, as far as like, I know Vitalik, who created Ethereum, he was saying something about, you call it quadratic voting or something like that. It sounds kind of similar to that in a way, if it's going by the inverse square law, but I'm not the most familiar with how that comes into effect and where you exactly got that number, but I see a symmetry, I guess. So
Well, it's
That's
very interesting that you bring that up. Vitalik Buterin, can you repeat his name again? I forget his name.
I forgot his last name. I don't know how to pronounce it, but Vitalik is his first name.
Yeah, Vitalik. Okay, he got the idea from an economist named Glenn Weil. Glenn Weil, it's interesting, fascinating to me how many Jewish thinkers have influenced my thinking.
Mhm.
And one of them is Glenn Weil. Glenn Weil is the creator of quadratic voting.
Okay.
And yeah, he comes from social choice theory, and he has demonstrated that the quadratic rule is the only function that will work in terms of economic efficiency in collective decision making. So that's what his movement is all about. My approach has been different in the sense that it comes from physics.
Mhm.
In other words, it's more fundamental. His approach has been through economics and statistics,
Mhm.
but economics and statistics emerge from or are founded on physics.
Yeah.
So it's the same idea, but and I've talked to him and we exchange emails, not often, but we exchange emails, and hopefully we'll talk soon. But I've tried to explain to him where his ideas are ultimately founded in, and they're ultimately founded in string theory.
Mhm.
Because at the very base of string theory, you'll find the quadratic equation and the inverse square law.
Okay.
So the idea is very foundational level, this quadratic math, there is a symmetry, or there's implications that reverberate through all levels of all scales and all levels of. And so he's having tremendous success with the quadratic voting idea. It's lately getting implemented in Colorado, in Taiwan. He's got an incredible following as well. Of course, he's been a lot more successful in getting his ideas taken seriously than I have.
Yeah.
But that's fantastic. Good.
Yeah. It's I mean, society, this has been a journey for me, is to see like how much society, people have to be ready for an idea before it takes off. And, you know, many of the ideas that I've been seeing with all these theories of everything are not, you know, a lot of them have a lot of crossover, and some of them are more unique. I think that your focus on transcending fields and affecting human structures is I've only seen that in my work as well, to some, like, to the same, I guess, dedication, just because I came from the political world. I wasn't a physics person, but I've never seen anyone else really focus on that. But even then, though, like, your physics framework is, and so everyone else's as well. It's like there's a lot of differences, and everybody's got their, you know, I guess, their blind spots. But it is interesting just to see how we are kind of coming towards this realization where it does appear to be that, you know, you have Stephen Wolfram's computational hypergraph universe, which is basically, I mean, it's a mind, and it looks like it. Even his, like, hypergraphs start to look like a brain. And I think I've spoken to Eric Weinstein a couple times about this concept, and pretty sure that this is what geometric unity is going towards as well. And you know, yours is very much so about looking at the correspondence between a brain and the cosmos. And so it's interesting to see that is, and same with Clear, when his work as well is very similar to this. So in a way, so it's interesting to see that that's the direction that we're going. It definitely does imply to me, it implies theism a little bit, but maybe, you know, you might disagree with that, but that's kind of just my interpretation of it. But you did say that there was a lot of Jewish, you know, branching into religion a bit. You said there's a lot of Jewish physicists who have impacted your thinking, and I come from a Jewish background, and so one of the things I realized when I got into this was, like, I saw a lot of that, and I wanted your idea, like maybe your take on this, especially as somebody who, I don't know, would you identify as a Catholic now?
Yeah, I'm Catholic.
Okay. So I was raised secular and Jewish, but like, which is, there is a way of, in Judaism, that it's about being attached to a group of people. And then there's also like this, belief system and religion that comes along with that, or customs. But I didn't grow up with that. I just grew up, secular. And, but then kind of have come around to also very much identifying with Christian beliefs about the, messianic structure and also, I mean, I think that the Christians are right about that. So what I'm interested to hear your take on this, is like, how does this translate to physics? And both of these things, you said, we were saying, what does it mean for Christ to save the world, essentially, or for a Messiah? Like, what is the Messianic era even to you? And also, what's your interpretation of I guess, the abundance of Jewish physicists?
Well, good questions. I think we can ground any topic or any conversation or any controversial question, philosophical question. My proposal is to ground it on, what does it have to say about human survival?
Mhm.
It just seems like such a basic and irrefutable base from which to build an argument.
Yeah.
And the same thing can apply to religion. What does Islam have to say about human survival? What does Judaism have to say about human survival? What does Christian philosophy or Catholicism or any other religion, what do they have to say? I think we have to agree that this is the fundamental question, because there's nothing else more important than human survival. If you want to talk about this world, if you want to talk about other worlds, then I suppose then we can get all the theists that want to talk about other worlds, and we can get Sean Carroll to talk about all the other worlds, and they can go have a philosophical dogfight about other worlds.
Yeah, that goes nowhere.
Yeah, my focus is on this world, because the idea is that this world is good, and it's worthwhile preserving human life in this world. So this question, I think, is the one that has to be answered by the various religions.
That's a very common theme in Judaism, is like, even though there is, there is a belief in an afterlife, but the focus is on this world. It's like, how do we improve this world? Interesting.
Sure. It's a very important Jewish tradition, and I think the world at the moment. I don't think I have enough time to cover this, because I have to go pretty soon.
That's right.
The Jewish tradition, the Jewish ideas have come from Israel through Europe, and then in the 15th and 16th centuries veered off into Northern Europe, away from the Catholic tradition. And I think this is where a lot of the errors that we're living in now stem from this rejection of the Jewish tradition, away from the Catholic tradition toward a Northern European Protestant tradition. The chief ideas among which are, or the chief poisonous ideas are, the idea that if everybody looks out for their own interests, we're going to be all better off. This is as far as I'm concerned, a recipe for disaster. This just can't be true. It flies against everything in the Judeo-Catholic tradition. And it also flies against some of the latest advances in in political science and social science and biology. You just can't have effective social systems where people who are born with 130, 150 IQs looking out for their own interests and expect people with 70 and 80 IQs to look out for their own interests and have everything just turn out dandy. This is just impossible.
Yeah.
Another very deleterious idea that has emerged from this rebellion against the Judeo-Catholic tradition is precisely the concept I talked about earlier. The idea that we don't need anybody to tell us what to do. Everybody's equal and everybody has one vote, and I can decide myself what to do. This is a very, very bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very bad idea. It's a recipe for disaster. Once again, this is basically blasphemous in the current context, precisely because the history of Europe and Western philosophy in general has veered toward the Northern European Protestant tradition.
Yeah.
And this Northern European Protestant tradition has branched out into an infinite number of different branches, one of them being the atheist branch,
Mm-hmm.
the atheist secularist branch. And if you talk to an atheist or a secular humanist, then you say, okay, fine, you're a secular humanist, you're an atheist, but what do you have to say about the modern human predicament? What do you have to say about the fact that we live on a planet that looks like we're going to, or it looks like we could possibly auto-destroy ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know it. I don't have anything to say about that. I just know that you can't prove there's no God. It just seems like an asinine argument as far as I'm concerned. In contrast, everything that I've talked about today, from physics to social choice theory to reconciling the tension between individualism and collectivism to the concrete proposal of what we need to do to move forward, is perfectly consistent with the Judeo-Catholic tradition of self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
So I think it resolves that question in a very practical way.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to repeat and stress here that this is not a philosophical argument.
Mm-hmm.
This is a mathematical and physical argument. It's
Yeah.
unlike any other argument, as far as I'm concerned, that I've heard out there, whether based on philosophy or based on opinion. This is grounded in physics. It's grounded in mathematics, in very rigorous physics and mathematics. It's the best that has emerged from the scientific tradition. And it appears to argue for the idea that nature itself is Christian.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think self-sacrifice is going to be revealed as a very key and essential structure in physics and even biology and politics and every sociology, every aspect of society. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't know how much more time you have. If you have to go, then that's fine. But I would love to have you back. This was a great conversation, and I definitely want to hear more about your work. So.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much. My wife is waiting for me, so I will have to say goodbye now. However, I'd love to come back. Let me know anytime. I appreciate your interest, and it was an interesting conversation.
What is your YouTube channel, and where is the best place for people to find your work?
Well, my YouTube channel is under my name, Luis Razo Bravo, and I suppose the best way to find me is on YouTube. Just look for my name. The channel is called A Theory of Everything, and I mean it in not only in the physical sense, but in the sense that all the senses that we've talked about today. We take up. My contention is that we have something meaningful to say about virtually any branch of human activity, and that's what that's what I've set out to test and demonstrate through the channel. Apart from that, I'm the founder and director of a company based in Barcelona, and we consult in data science and artificial intelligence. So you can find me through our website as well. It's EISM.eu.
Very cool. Yeah, I think we're going to have a conversation one day on artificial intelligence. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. So, all right.
Well, it's like the other topics that we talked about today. The proposal has very interesting and I use the word in quotes, definitive things to say about artificial intelligence. It's basically all converging to the same essential conclusions.
Yep. Yeah, I would definitely agree. So, all right. Thank you very much. And I'm sure we will speak again.
Tyler, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Bye.